Hello, everybody. I'm Bernie Goldberg, for those of you who don't know, and this is the No BS Zone. Today, my good friend in the Rocky Mountains, John Daly, has a special guest for today's No BS Zone. John, who's that guest?
Well, our special guest today, Bernie, is you. So you're a longtime CBS News journalist.
I can't believe this.
I know it really caught you by surprise, I'm sure. But no, we decided to do something a little different. Bernie, you and I typically have a back and forth conversation about various stories in the current national news cycle. Instead, I'm going to be interviewing you, as I said, a distinguished veteran journalist, about the current state of the news media. I thought this would be sort of interesting. What I've done is put together some questions of my own, along with some, you don't actually know this, Bernie, some I solicited the other day on Twitter, aka X. So, sort of some casual readers weighing in. So, are you all set, Bernie? You want me to go ahead?
No, let's call this off. I got to go. Bye-bye.
That's all right.
All right, now let's give it a shot.
All right, all right. Well, I'm going to start with a big story that is currently in the news media, the Biden cover-up.
Okay.
We've learned, you've written about it, you've talked about it. We've learned new information from a book by journalist Alex Johnson and Jake Tapper about the extraordinary lengths that people in the Biden administration went to cover up the former president's declining mental facilities. The news media also has taken a big hit in all of this, especially from the political right. Liberal journalists and other news media figures have been accused of being in on the cover up. Bernie, do you think that is a fair accusation, or do you think that the news media's big problem on this was that far too many people in the profession were too incurious to actually investigate in a meaningful way clear signs of Biden's mental decline, perhaps out of fear of what they might find?
Well, the biggest single problem is that they showed an astonishing lack of curiosity. Their reasoning or their excuse has been, well, Biden's inner circle kept the truth from us. This is the no BS zone, and that is total BS. The Biden's inner circle kept the truth from you, kept the truth from me, kept the truth from every single person listening to me right now. And we all knew that Biden's mental state was in serious decline. How did we all know? And reporters in Washington covering the White House, they somehow didn't know. So, in that sense, their lack of curiosity about it, and their lack of curiosity was, I know this is simplistic, but it's true. They didn't want to report and find out anything that might help Donald Trump win election and hurt Joe Biden or Kamala Harris lose the election. It's that cynical. But to the extent that they knew about it in the same way you and I knew about it and everybody watching us knew about it, yeah, they were in on it. They were in on it. Now here's how they weren't in on it. Did they go to Jill Biden and Biden's inner circle and say, look, we know what's going on, but we're on your side. We're not going to report anything. Did they collude? Did they actually have conversation? No, no, there's no, I mean, it's possible. It's possible, but not likely, not likely. Uh, what is far more likely, and not even more likely, what is obvious is that they knew about his mental condition because everybody knew about it, and they didn't want to report about it because they thought it would help Donald Trump. If that sounds simple, it's because it is.
No, I think that's a totally valid point. I've seen some. I don't know if you call them journalists or news media figures. I know Joe Scarborough is one who's taking a lot of heat, and I think deservedly so because he was
Deservedly so.
very.
Right, deservedly so. He went on one day and he said, and if you don't agree with this, F you. That's what he said, F you. And he didn't spell out the word. He just said F you. Well, F you, Joe Scarborough. You hack. I mean, your job, you pretend to be a journalist in that you're talking about journalistic issues, you're talking about the news, and yet you're a team player. You're a Democratic team player. So shame on you, Joe Scarborough.
Yeah, I think that's a fair critique of him. He went above and beyond what a lot of other people in the media did. Um, I wanted to ask you, Bernie, about what influence you believe today's news media still has on shaping public opinion. Back when you wrote Bias, and even up through when you wrote your last book, A Slobbering Love Affair, I think what you and many people called the mainstream media, I think it's sort of strange to call them that these days, but I think they did have a good amount of influence on public opinion. At least I think they did. That the media is seemingly, still the number one enemy of the political right, at least according to many on the political right. But do you think that and I think legacy media is probably a better term these days because Fox News could be considered mainstream with their viewership. But do you think the legacy media, for all their biases, is really changing anyone's views on anything anymore?
I'll get to a yes or no on that in a minute. Let's go back even before bias. Let's go back to when Walter Cronkite was anchoring the CBS Evening News. He left the anchor desk and went to Vietnam, and he came back with a report that indicated things were, to say the least, were not going well. And the President of the United States of America, Lyndon B. Johnson, said, if I've lost Walter Cronkite, I've lost middle America. Could you imagine any anchor having that kind of influence today? As a matter of fact, let me ask you, John, and everybody else watching, and I'll pause for an answer. Name the anchor of the CBS Evening News today.
Is that Lester Holt, or is that even the right channel? I don't know.
Yeah, no, nobody knows. I mean, we don't even know the name of it's a dual anchor.
I can picture him. He's that young guy with the.
No, 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 it's two guys.
Oh,
They have a
oh,
dual anchor. Um,
you're good point. You made a good point there.
yeah, so we don't even know that. It's not only that Walter Cronkite had influence and these guys don't. We don't even know the names of the CBS News anchor. Maybe we know Lester Holt and David Muir, NBC and ABC respectively, but they don't have that kind of influence. Now, let's go to, so the networks are an idea whose time has come and gone. They're in the rearview mirror, the three networks. Let's go to cable now. Let's take an especially dopey person, especially unserious person. Let's take let's take Jesse Waters. He actually may have influence on the people who watch Jesse Waters. I mean, if a cable news show has 3 million viewers, that's a lot, and yet we have over 300 million people in the United States, which means they have less than 1% of the American people are watching the highest rated cable news shows. 99 point something percent are doing something else. So they don't have influence, to answer your question. No, they don't have influence over the larger America. But in cable, where it's polarized, where it's designed for a niche partisan audience, yeah, those people may have some influence. They may say things that are crazy and right or wrong, and have people repeat it afterwards. I've had people come up to me and say, do you know about, should so and so be prosecuted for saying what he said about Donald Trump? And I'm thinking, where the hell did you get that idea? Well, they must have got it from somebody on Fox. So do they have influence? Yes, but they have influence with a very small sliver, a tiny sliver of the American population and even the American electorate. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. I'm actually going to explore that point a little bit more in one of my later questions because I do think the political right, the right-wing media has more influence these days than the left-wing media. But
Yeah,
I will.
I would question that. I would question
Okay.
that. And let's get to that now, if that's okay with you.
Well, I wanted to just kind of throw one point out about that. We can get to that in a second. Um, I think a good example of the case for a good argument for the case that the liberal media isn't as relevant as it used to be as far as changing opinion. I think we just talked about one at the top, Biden's mental decline. You know, despite the legacy media's biases and despite their incuriosity on the matter, very few people among the public were fooled into believing Biden was fit for duty, and that includes Democrats. Most, even before that terrible debate Biden had, most Democrats thought he was unfit for a second term. You know, they went somebody else, and so, you know, it's I hear on the right you hear a lot about, you know, if it wasn't for the media, you know, we would have figured this out. I'm like, people figured it out without the media. It was their protection of Biden didn't really seem to make a difference.
Well, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Uh, and the media that that kept it from the American people were liberal media by and large. I mean, Fox was talking about it all the time. Uh, Wall Street Journal editorial page, which is the smartest page in all of newspaperdom, uh, was talking. It was obvious. So even you make a good point in that even if the mainstream, so-called mainstream liberal media, uh, didn't want to play that up and even knock down a Wall Street Journal report that said he was in mental decline. They went after the Wall Street Journal for reporting that. It didn't influence the American people because they had two eyes and they saw what they saw with those eyes. So, in that sense, another example, the media didn't have much influence or influence at all on the electorate because you can't tell people, you can't keep something, you can't say water is not wet when everybody knows it's wet. You just can't tell the American people certain things that are obviously not true. And the mainstream media, again, which is overwhelmingly liberal, uh, was telling the people, the American people, that they were fake videos, that what you saw about Biden wandering off wasn't really what you saw. So, no, they didn't have influence because they were telling the American people stuff that no reasonable people could possibly believe. I want to get to your point about how you don't think it's mostly liberal anymore. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that because I think it is mostly liberal. The New York
Well,
Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, and on the other side, there's Fox. There's the
yeah,
editor.
no, so I think most of the media still is liberal, just to be clear, but I don't think they have the influence that many on the right do. And you know, we always sort of throw this into Fox News because they're the biggest, you know, right wing institution there is in the media, and you know their peak viewership, and it may even be more. I know they've kind of gone up and down, but let's say between 3 and 4 million, you know, a night, something like that. But that's what they get. I think it's actually quite a bit more than that when you factor in all the internet clips from Fox News. But you also, you know, when I say right wing media, I'm thinking about the podcasts. The biggest political podcasts are right wing podcasts. They're not left wing podcasts in this country. Radio shows, much bigger on the right. Social media, back during the Obama years, I think conservatives were pretty far behind the Democrats when it came to, you know, taking advantage of social media. Not so much the case anymore. You know, you look at the biggest political social media presences. You know, well, Elon Musk is in charge of Twitter. You have Ben Shapiro; he's just killing it. You know, in the ratings before Dan Bongino somehow made it into the
I,
FBI.
I think because I'm ignorant of social media, blissfully ignorant of social media, I think the reason these conservative or right wing podcasts have influence, it's because the people who go to them already believe what they're being told.
I think there's much truth to that, but I think it does sort of soak down into the general electorate. I've been surprised that people who, you know, I know personally, and I see this again on social media, um, how much people who used to be sort of silent and I knew they weren't particularly right wing, but they've really sort of adopted a lot of these talking points you see that come off of Fox News and come off of the popular right wing sites. I think these people have a lot of influence, especially during. I think they have much more influence over the Republican base than MSNBC has over the Democratic base. I think you see that maybe in um, Democratic primaries, Republican primaries. I think I think there are a lot of people on MSNBC who wanted someone much more liberal than Joe Biden to run for president, all that, and I don't think they have that sort of influence to really um, push people in
Whatever
that
whatever
direction.
influence cable news has, because the networks, in my opinion, have no influence. And by the way, in fairness, should they have any influence, their job isn't to change people's minds. Their job in a 22-minute newscast, that's a 30-minute newscast minus the hellos and goodbyes and commercials, comes out to about 22 minutes or so, 21 minutes maybe. Their
Right.
job is to tell us what happened that today, not to influence our opinion. So to say they have no influence, they could rightly say, and what's your point? We're not designed to have influence, but in any event, they don't. Walter Cronkite isn't coming through the studio door and sitting behind the anchor desk. That ain't happening. As far as cable goes, I mentioned, yes, they do have influence, but they have influence in a very small sliver of the American population. Because even if you take the 3 to 4 million viewers and increase it to 5 or 6 million, that's in a population of 330 million Americans. It still comes out to about 1%, meaning 99% of the American people didn't listen to what the person said, doesn't know what the person said, and very likely doesn't know the name of the person who said it. So, to the extent that cable has influence, it's in a control group, a small control group.
Right. No, and I think that that's true for cable. But like I said, like other, you look at Joe Rogan. He's not a conservative, but he's been very, he's been pro-Trump. He endorsed Trump in the last election. He's very
That probably
into,
matters. That
yeah,
probably matters.
yeah. He's very into a lot of the right-wing conspiracy theories for sure. And I think you add him and you add other people together. Tucker Carlson, believe it or not, still has a big following, even though he's not on television anymore. He's doing his online stuff. But people listen to him. But yeah, no, it's
John,
mhm.
people, if Joe Rogan says vote for Donald Trump, he's going to have some influence at the margins, because the people who are already going to vote for Donald Trump aren't influenced by Joe Rogan. It's people, younger people, who might have voted Democratic, and they listen to Rogan saying something that resonates with them, and they might switch over in the last election and to vote for Donald Trump. That's the influence. But it isn't like the old days when there were 3 TV networks, and that's the only place you can get your national news on television. And Walter Cronkite was the most trusted man in America. Those days are gone.
Right. Absolutely. I agree with that for sure. So here's a question, Bernie, from someone on X. They asked, do you still have legacy media contacts today that you keep in touch with, or has that well, I like the phrasing, has that well pretty much dried up between your criticisms of the industry and also just old colleagues retiring?
I'm going to be very careful how I say this,
Okay.
because if I answered yes, then I'd have people at the networks who would be under suspicion, because, well, they talked to Bernie Goldberg, the guy who wrote Bias. No, that person could be in jeopardy. Do I have friends from the old days? Yes. Do I talk to them about the Knicks or the Yankees every now and then? Yes. And beyond that, I'm not saying anything.
I will add, and this won't give anything away, just as someone who's involved with your membership, there are members of the legacy media, prominent ones that everybody here would recognize. I'm not just talking about, well, Bill O'Reilly's not legacy media, but other people too, any of the people recognize who are subscribers to this site. So they're very familiar with what you say. I don't know how many personal, what kind of personal communication you have with some of them, but there are people that pay attention to what we're doing here. I made this comment a few times, but you actually sort of alluded to it yourself a little earlier. But I think I pay closer attention to your social media mentions, Bernie, than you do. And I've seen a lot of people on the right, and I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but there's a lot of people on the right who, over the years, say that your book bias is what first convinced them that the media is lying to them, and that what they report is fake news. But lying and fake news were never part of your thesis on bias. It was largely about unconscious bias, the liberal bubble, the fish that doesn't know he's wet. And likewise, there are people on the left who insist, Bernie, and you got one of these comments just yesterday, that you are actually, believe it or not, the godfather of the MAGA movement, because you, sir, created this permission structure for people to dismiss journalism as an inherently dishonest industry, which again was not your thesis. So I'm curious, do you hear this sort of stuff from people in the real world who kind of have this sort of misconception of what you wrote all those years ago? And if so, how do you respond to it?
Let me first say, many, many years ago, the New Republic, the iconic liberal magazine out of Washington, D.C., wrote a piece, I think it was under the headline, Mainstream Media RIP, Rest in Peace. And they actually named me by name as one of the people responsible for the death of mainstream. If I had that kind of influence, you'd know about it. Everybody would know about it, because I take out billboards across the United States saying, I'm the most important person. It's ridiculous to think that I have that kind of influence. Now, as far as people thinking that I said the media lied, let me just review what I did say in the book. I said the problem with the bias in the media and why it's liberal bias is because newsrooms are populated overwhelmingly by liberal journalists, and the groupthink is created. They don't come in the morning, I've said, and give the secret handshake and the secret salute and meet with Dan Rather in a closed room where the lights are out and say, how are we going to get those conservatives today? I've said a million times that never happened. It was groupthink. They thought that their views weren't liberal. They thought their views were reasonable, were moderate, were mainstream and middle of the road. That's how bias came about. That was my point. So to my friends who think that I talked about fake news and all that, not in the way you're thinking about it, no. And as far as the other side who thinks I'm the godfather of MAGA, don't hold any sharp objects too close. I mean, you're crazy. You're nuts. You're no, I'm not the. I've written a number of pieces, even saying listing my problems with Donald Trump. So how am I the king of MAGA if I've written extensively about the downside of Donald Trump? This is social media. Why I'm not part of it. Anybody. It's democratized media. Everybody has a voice. That's good, and it's also bad.
It's funny, the guy that I mentioned that said this yesterday, he also, I thought it was interesting, blamed you for the popularity of Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity. I'm like, you might want to look at the timeline there. Those people were both well established before
What
30 or.
is the reasoning? How in the world am I? Rush Limbaugh, you can make a case, helped me.
Yes.
And he did help me. He had me on it. He didn't have guests on his show by and large. He had me on several times. And my book, whatever book I was talking about, jumped higher on the list after I was. So Rush helped me. I didn't help Rush. I mean, come on.
It's silly, and I think blaming you for Sean Hannity was particularly a painful criticism there. 'Cause
I mean, even Sean Hannity helped me. I mean, there was a time when I wasn't critical of these people because I was being attacked every day by the left. And at least these people not only weren't attacking me, but were embracing me. And Sean Hannity was a big help in selling some of my books, promoting some of my books, and I appreciate that. We've drifted apart. I've even drifted apart. I wrote when Rush died. I was very saddened by his passing. I liked him, but I talked about how he became part of the MAGA movement, and that was a disappointment. So Rush helped me, Sean helped me, but I drifted away from both of them because
yeah,
of Donald Trump.
yeah, no, I hear you. Here's another one from somebody on X. They wanted to know if you have watched Scott Jennings on the CNN shows. He's usually on those roundtables, and if so, what are your thoughts on him?
The answer is yes, I have, and I'm glad he's there because sometimes he goes too far and loses me, but most of the time he doesn't. Most of the time he's an antidote to the people on the left, and I think CNN needed something like that. Now, I don't know if CNN's core audience appreciates Scott Jennings the way, the
They
way I
probably don't.
do. I doubt they do. But yeah, I've seen him and I like him and I'm glad he's there. And to the extent that CNN deserves credit, I give him credit for that.
All right, all right. This going back to a question I have, the political right always has, of course, plenty of criticism for the liberal media, and a lot of it, as we've said, is legitimate. But what gets me is that many of the same people who absolutely excoriate the liberal media for being biased very rarely, if ever, apply those same standards to the right wing media, who I would argue, like I said, we disagree on that. But I think between cable news, websites, social media, podcasts, I think they have more influence on public opinion these days than the liberal media. But Bernie, as a traditional journalist with traditional journalistic standards, how counterproductive do you think this is to actually improving the profession of journalism, where you just have one side who doesn't care how biased their side is, another side who doesn't care how biased that side is, but always wags the finger at the other side for behavior they are fine with their side doing?
Well, a couple of points. This is one more example of why I've said principles are either dead or close to it. How could you be principled if you criticize liberal bias and ignore conservative bias if you're a conservative? And the same is true on the other side. The other side sees Fox with 2020 eyesight and sees everything wrong with Fox, but doesn't see anything wrong with MSNBC. So both sides are full of crap, as far as I'm concerned. Both sides are, it's BS on both sides. How does it help the respect for the media? It doesn't. It doesn't because it's like Jerry Seinfeld once told a story about how you root for your favorite baseball player on your home team, but he gets traded away to the another team. And when he comes back as an away player, you boo him. You don't root for him. So he said, we're rooting for laundry. We're not rooting for human beings. We're rooting for laundry. It depends on what color uniform they're wearing. It's the same thing with political coverage. We're rooting for the color of the team uniform. If you're a liberal, you're rooting for the blue team. If you're a conservative, you're rooting for the red team. And where you lose credibility is when you have 20/20 eyesight on the other side's faults and you're deaf, dumb, and blind to your own side's faults. So you can't take either one seriously if they don't want to be serious themselves.
I think in some cases, and I think this is true on both the right and left. Well, we know it's on, you've written about this a lot on the left, where they genuinely don't know, don't recognize the bias. They're sort of inside that bubble. But I think in other cases, and I think many on the right, and I see it, and I'll give you an example in a minute, but I think many on the right do recognize the biases, but they see them as on their side, but they see it as perfectly justified because of all of the stuff they don't like about the left and the power and influence they believe the left has. And this is sort of a connected issue. So you wrote a column on Monday.
Let me just jump in on that.
Sure.
That's another good point, because a lot of times I'll hear from people when I criticize Donald Trump, for instance, and they'll say, not you're right or you're wrong, but they'll say, what about Joe Biden?
Because you haven't criticized Biden at all, right, Bernie?
Well, so the point you're making is a good one, in that a lot of times people on the right will notice their own bias. Not always, by the way, but sometimes they'll notice their own bias and say, yeah, but what about the other side? They're worse. Well, yeah, the other side may be worse because of the volume of their bias. You know, 8 million people are watching ABC News or something. So if they're biased, that's 8 million people watching, not 20 people watching. But it's not good enough to say, yeah, we recognize our bias, but what about the other side's bias? That's not a good answer.
Yeah. And I was going to say, so you were in your Monday column, you wrote about Trump's shakedown of CBS News, and I think in that situation, I think we're sort of the same here. Just on the facts of the matter, I see it as an attack on freedom of the press, an attack on freedom of speech. It's the kind of thing that constitutional conservatives, that used to be a term people would always on the right would proudly assign to themselves. Even these people from just 10 years ago would have found this very troubling, even if they couldn't stand CBS News. But many of the reactions, and I don't know if you read the comments on your column on Monday, Bernie, but were sort of along the lines of, well, yeah, maybe it's a shakedown, but Mr. Trump has been treated so poorly by people, including the media, so I'm okay with him doing it. And I think that viewpoint is just completely wrong, and I think
But it's understandable.
I understand it, but I think I get it. I don't agree with it, but it's not. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think you summed it up. I get it, but I don't agree with it. I, I mean, I understand why people say, oh, yeah, Donald Trump is shaking down CBS, asking for a settlement on its $20 billion crazy lawsuit again about the Kamala Harris, how CBS edited the Kamala Harris interview before the election. It's a crazy lawsuit. Nobody at CBS News would pay a penny to settle that lawsuit, but Paramount, the parent company, is trying to sell it. It's trying to sell Paramount to a company called Skydance Media, and they'll need Donald Trump's Federal Communications Commission approval. So they'll settle for the lawsuit, maybe for 30 million, maybe for $50 million, to make Donald Trump happy and smooth the way for the FCC to approve the sale. Okay. That's a shakedown as far as I'm concerned, because it's a crazy lawsuit. And the only reason Paramount is settling is so that they could sell the company. People at CBS News are very unhappy about this. There's not one person at CBS News who would make this deal to settle, but it's a corporation that owns CBS News, and the corporation cares about business. And business says, if we pay 30 million to Donald Trump, then we could sell the company and make hundreds of millions. The controlling shareholder, Sherry Redstone, will make hundreds of millions. So a $30 million payoff or $50 million payoff is a small price of doing business.
Yeah, looks like
Did
it's
I answer
purely.
your question? Did I answer your question, or did I go off on a tangent?
No, no, it's all related stuff. I think just sort of the broader view of this is I think there is nothing that, the committed left, that their side could do that they will ever deem worse than what Donald Trump has done. And on the right, there is nothing Donald Trump could ever do that will ever be worse than what Democratic leadership or the mainstream media or whoever has done. And so,
And that sums it up. That actually sums it up. That explains everything. That
yeah,
explains that explains why one side minimizes its faults and maximizes the other side's faults, and the other side does the same thing in its way.
and I think that's why it's always good to, again, that doesn't happen as much anymore. But I think principles are so much more important than people in this matter, because people just they see it as a team sport, a team, this game almost. And it's I think it now more than ever, we have to put emphasis on principles, but it's all going in the opposite direction of that, Bernie.
There's something in human nature that makes this all understandable, at least to me. If if your side has been treated badly, and let's say conservatives have been treated badly by liberals in the media, then it's understandable to say, yeah, maybe my side has done something wrong, but I don't care. I don't care. Your side is worse. There's something in human nature, something in the way we evolved over a million years that makes that understandable to me and even sensible to me. But it's not a good thing, because if your side is doing something wrong, you should deal with it. You should acknowledge it. Because if you want the other side, if you want liberals to acknowledge that they've done things wrong, then you have to acknowledge, if you're a conservative, that you've also done things wrong. You could
I
also,
agree.
you could say, I wrote an email to Roger Ailes once, the head of Fox News, about what I thought my role should be. And he said, you can criticize either side, I don't care, but liberals are worse in my view. And I think he's right. In terms of media, liberals are worse. Liberals traditionally have been the bigger problem, but that doesn't give conservatives license to do exactly what they accuse liberals of doing. Conservative bias is also wrong, and they have to acknowledge that. They can say the other side is worse, but they can't pretend that they have clean hands, because there is such a thing as conservative bias. And anytime I say that, people on the right get angry at me.
That's
True.
Well, that's what's tough, Bernie, about people in your position and my position, and there's others of us too. But we have no problem criticizing both sides, which makes both sides mad at us. So we're in this little sliver of area between these, the two sides that get people really upset. But it is what it is. So I'll unless you wanted to add something to there, I'll ask you one last question from a viewer. Was there something you wanted to add, Bernie?
No, I just want to say at the very end, I want to make the point that I've been doing some YouTube videos, and go to them, check them out. They're short videos, minute and a half, 2.5 minutes, that range, maybe a little longer. And check it out before you do too many other things. Go to YouTube, go to my page, and check out the most recent videos.
I'll put a link to your channel in the show notes so people can go directly to it when
Right.
they're listening or watching this.
To your last question,
Yeah, the last question. So I know you get asked this from time to time, but we get, new subscribers, all that stuff. So people are always curious who someone like you, Bernie Goldberg, turns to for their news and their commentary, their favorite places. If you could just share some of those.
I subscribe to the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Okay. To the extent that I watch news on TV, I'll have it on Fox, I'll switch over to CNN, and I'll switch briefly to MSNBC, because they are in a class by themselves. You know, they're playing deep left field. Um, and what I find interesting, John, which may not be a direct answer to your question, but I'll get to it, is if you watch Fox and CNN, you're watching a view of two different Americas.
Yeah.
Both cover legitimate stories, let's assume both get them right, the way they cover them. But one side doesn't cover the crisis on the border when Biden was president. If you watch CNN or MSNBC, you probably didn't know there was an open border. If you watch Fox, you sure as hell knew it. But if you watch Fox, you wouldn't know all the things Donald Trump said that were totally insane. So it's like there are two different Americas, and each, the conservative cable and the liberal cable, are appealing to their niche audience. You know what I'm saying, John?
Yeah, no, I absolutely do.
So I watch a little of both, because if I only watch one, I'm not getting a full view of what's going on. So I would suggest, if you want to know what's going on, watch a couple of TV newscasts and read a couple of newspapers. I know that you have jobs, you have things to do. If you're retired, you don't want to spend all your time reading newspapers. But to the extent that the amount of time you're devoting to the news, check out more than one source. Otherwise, you're going to get a narrow view of the United States of America and the world.
Good advice for sure. Well, that was my last question, Bernie. I want to direct everybody, like you said, to the YouTube channel. Would like to have people subscribe, become a paying subscriber. You get a lot more content than those of you who are free subscribers. So definitely, we have a just a few days left. We have a May deal right now going on where it's $10 off a annual subscription. It's only $40 for an annual subscription right now until June 1st. So people should definitely take advantage of that. Anything else you'd like to add, Bernie, before we finish up today's episode?
I'll add something I add at the end of all of these things, and I'll acknowledge that I'm wasting my time and my breath, because none of you out there listen to me when I say get a subscription for a friend, for a relative, for somebody you like, for somebody you don't like, and you want to drive crazy when I write things about, Trump on the right, or when I write things about Biden on the left. There are things I write that people will like, and things that I write that people don't like, and things I will say that people on the left will like or not like, and same with the people on the right. You'll like it or not like it. Get a subscription for a friend or a relative. Drive them nuts or make them happy. I've said this before, you never do it. You mock me, you listen to me and don't do it. Try to do it just for me this one time.
And
Okay?
we know you people have friends because we met a bunch of friendly people in the comment section. So we know that you've got to have friends hanging out with you. They might not enjoy the same, politics that you do, but like I said, this is a good.
It's more fun when we have a huge audience instead of a smaller audience. So tell your friends, please. Thank you.
Absolutely. Everybody, have a good day. Bernie, I think this was a good episode, and I will talk to you later.
We'll find out if people thought it was a good episode. Leave a comment. Thanks, everybody.